GBNews. But joining me now to discuss this is Lorton MP. Tim was amongst the UK citizens sanctioned, I was nearly saying sectioned there, Tim, sanctioned by the China last March. Tim, thank you for joining us. Obviously, this is a very serious issue. One of your colleagues, Ian Duncan-Smith, has said that there's a clear and present threat to democracy. How big of an issue is this?
I think this is a really huge issue, and thank you for describing it as sectioned rather than sanctioned. Sometimes I feel I should be what's going on in Parliament. But this is really serious. So this is somebody who has been identified by our intelligence services as somebody who is a threat to the UK, is working covertly for the Chinese Communist Party government, who clearly has malign intentions towards getting information that will be of use to the Chinese authorities, whose son is working with a security pass within Parliament itself. I don't know how involved or not he may or may not be, but obviously there's a potential there. But she is funding a Labour MP's office to the tune of more than £500,000, which again raises some very serious questions. So here are people who could well be a threat to us, and we know what the Chinese are capable of, at the heart of our democracy. So this needs to be taken really, really seriously. And that's why one of the things we've been calling for, those of us who've been sanctioned and others who are rather better informed about China's intentions, we need to have a real audit of where all these tentacles, as I call them, of the Chinese Communist Party state are involved in institutions, in organisations, in company boardrooms, in university campuses, in schools across the UK and many other Western countries, because they pose a real threat.
And of course, you're a member of the Interparliamentary Chinese Alliance on China, and one of those sanctioned, as you've rightly said. I mean, tell us about your personal experience. What is it that they have been doing, as far as you're concerned, in relation to democracy here in the UK?
Well, I was sanctioned completely out of the blue earlier last year, along with 6 other parliamentarians, 5 Conservative MPs and 2 members of the House of Lords, and then 2 other individuals and some organisations, purely in retaliation for some sanctions which the UK government, thank goodness, brought in against various Chinese officials linked to various human rights abuses. And we need to see more of that happening. So we were picked off as people who have been quite vociferous in Parliament in calling for greater sanctions against the Chinese, for standing up and calling them out for the genocide, and that's what we've called it. That's what Parliament's voted on. That's been going on in Xinjiang province against the Uyghurs. I, for many, many years, as chairman of the Parliamentary Tibet Group, has called out China on their human rights abuses going back 60 years against Tibetans as well. But what has been really worrying is what has come out over the last couple of years is just how entrenched Chinese companies, controlled by the Chinese government, Chinese institutions are in our university campuses, where they are very large fee payers. They're funding universities in this country more than £2 billion with Chinese students. That they bought influence in boardrooms. They're taking over companies, in many cases in sensitive areas linked with defence and communications. Huawei, we had to get that stopped in Parliament, that the Chinese would have effectively been behind our 5G telecommunications infrastructure in the UK. Their influence goes wide and far, and we need to be having a much more transparent look at exactly what their intentions are, what they are doing, because they are wielding a lot of influence. And as Emily Thornberry said earlier, they have a reputation for hoovering up useful information and using it for purposes that I don't think we would see as friendly.
Well, Tim, you will remember back when David Cameron was Prime Minister and George Osborne was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Chinese companies were being welcomed with open arms at that time, and indeed we were told we were in a new era of Sino-British relations, and indeed they invested in a lot of companies. You're right to mention universities. We know there's been a lot of concerns raised around freedom of speech in relation to a number of universities there, but they are in the very infrastructure of our country, because some of the people in power in the early 2010s invited them in. Is that not the case?
I'm afraid it is. And this whole golden age of or a new relationship with China, I'm afraid in retrospect, was a big mistake. And those of us who were a little more in the know about what China was capable of, what it's done against Tibetans, and now we're seeing in Xinjiang, and now against people in Hong Kong, was very wary of forging those closer links. But of course, China is very clever. They're very smart. They have bought influence throughout the world. They have given soft loans to many countries, particularly in East Africa and Sri Lanka and other countries, who are now hugely in hock to the Chinese government, and in some cases going bankrupt. They now control something like 104 ports around the world, including some in Europe. So China is getting a real grip on some essential infrastructure projects around the world. And of course, as we've seen in the pandemic, they've actually had a monopoly on the supply of PPE and other things, which I'm afraid we've been taking for granted for too long and just importing from China because they produce them cheaply. Well, we need security of supply. And we're seeing with many of the pressures on their supply chains now that it's a big mistake to be relying on rather unsatisfactory countries from the other side of the world to continue supplying you with things that, frankly, we should be doing more ourselves. And that's what I think, at last, Britain, US and other European and Western democracies are waking up to the fact that we need to look beyond the face that China has been presenting, because their intentions are far from benign.
Well, Tim, no doubt we'll return to this. Certainly their geopolitical influence seems to have increased greatly right across the globe with their Belt and Road Initiative, and no doubt it's something that we will return to on this news channel. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Pleasure.